All right. Hi, everyone.
It's bright.
You,
Oh, look,
yeah, you
yeah.
weren't kidding. Can't see anything. Well, first of all, thanks for having all of us here. I'm going to introduce our panel here in just a second, but Bobby had approached me about this idea of this panel, and I thought it was really, really interesting because while we're all focused here, rightfully so, on a lot of the technology, it's also really, really important to make sure that we, as much as we can, try to understand how folks that we have to work with think and how they are also trying to navigate that with the stakeholders that they represent. Well, work with your peers, right? So, but first of all, I want to just introduce our guests here and thank them for being a part of this panel. First, I have Commissioner Kim Duffley. She's a native of North Carolina, and she received her Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and Political Science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Also got her JD at Mercer School of Law. And prior to joining the Utility Commission, Commissioner Duffley was also an Assistant Attorney General in the Environmental Division of the North Carolina Attorney General's Office. And until her appointment as a commissioner, she was also a senior staff attorney with Utilities Commission and was co-chair of the staff subcommittee on electricity of NARUC. She's also a board-certified specialist in utilities law and serves in the North Carolina Utilities Law Specialization Committee. And she enjoys art, traveling, and reading, maybe in that order. Is that right?
Traveling as I get older, that
Okay.
might move up to
Fair
the
enough.
top.
And then,
Which I enjoy the art while I'm traveling.
excellent. And then she and her husband live in Raleigh and have 2 children. If we can please welcome Commissioner Kim Duffley. We also here have with us Commissioner Andrew French. So Commissioner French is Kansas's representative in the Southwest Power Pool and regularly participates in SPP stakeholder groups, including the Regional State Committee. Before his appointment to the KCC, French practiced law with a focus on energy policy and the regulation of utility rates and services, and he represented a broad spectrum of energy stakeholders, including large industrial energy customers, school districts, and a natural gas utility company. And then prior to that, in private practice, Commissioner French was a staff litigation attorney with the KCC. He has his degree in environmental studies from University of Kansas and a JD also from University of Kansas School of Law. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner French. All right, so like I said, we wanted to have a chance to have a conversation around getting to know folks like yourselves, and to the extent possible, speaking, for a little bit of, I'll call it your peers in other states and that sort of thing. So to kind of start off, could each of you maybe just give us, a little bit of a brief overview of your roles as a commissioner, and then specifically how commissioners are tasked with trying to view kind of the balance of the proposals and goals of electric utilities with that of legislative or state goals. Commissioner Duffley, could I kind of start with you, please?
Sure. You can start with me. And before I answer that question, I just want to thank Bobby for inviting me to this conference. I flew in last night and went to the Innovation Center, and I was so impressed. I stopped at several of the booths and asked a lot of questions, and it's really nice to talk with people that love what they do, and they're excited to answer any and all questions. And, we as commissioners, we're lifelong learners, I think. Andrew, I think you would say the same thing. So I get excited when I'm talking with someone that's really excited about what they do and their job. And then the other thing I'll mention is David mentioned, what side are you on? I was talking with someone, I'm just flew in last night. I'm going to be flying out right after I leave. and they said, "Oh, where are you? Are you on the Missouri side?" And I was like, "I have no idea." So I knew the geography issue, but I just had no idea where I was. So, and then you asked, well, what do we do? So, as a philosophy major, I think that philosophy major actually helps with what we do, because we want our utility companies, and for purposes of this audience, it'll be our electric utility companies, to provide safe, reliable, and affordable electricity. And within North Carolina, we have some decarbonization goals, so that would also include increasingly clean energy. And so that really is the tenet of our job. Did you want me to talk a little bit more about North Carolina and House Bill 951 at this point?
Sure, yeah.
So just to give you a little bit of background, and all commissions are different. We're like snowflakes, but that core, safe, reliable, affordable, it kind of goes throughout. But you'll see in what Andrew and I say, our commissions are a little bit different, and one of those differences is our decarbonization goals in North Carolina. In 2021, the General Assembly, and we have a Democratic governor and then majority Republican General Assembly. So this was a bipartisan bill, and it was passed in 2021, and it directed the commission to institute a plan to have Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas reduce their emissions, carbon emissions, from 2005 levels by 70% by 2030, and then to be net zero by 2050. Just to give you an update, they said we had to have the first plan done by the end of 2022, and then do one of these plans every 2 years. We did our plan in 2022. We just issued last Friday, and there was a little snark that we issued this plan right before an election on a Friday afternoon, but we just had gotten our work done and issued the plan. That 2030 goal, though, the issue in the case was, was that feasible to meet that 70% reduction by 2030? And that's kind of potentially been pushed back a little bit. But so other state commissions, though, do not have these decarbonization goals, and that makes a difference.
Commissioner French, could I ask you to kind of add to that too?
Yeah. So I'm happy to be here because it was a short commute, but I came from the Kansas side. But I'm glad to be hosting Kim here. Kim's a great friend. I've gotten to know her on a couple different groups we've been on together, and I'd say we're some of the more engaged commissioners throughout the country. Both are lifelong learners, as she said, and so really glad you're here in my turf now. I'm sure I'll return the favor soon.
I love it, and I can't wait to come back and spend more time.
Exactly. Well, I also want to get a little philosophical to start, because I'm sure everybody didn't see this on the agenda and think, oh, there's a panel with regulators. That's the first thing I want to go to.
It was the top request for the entire conference.
But I think we need to bring it back, and I'm not trying to scare anyone here, but try to help people understand why you probably thought this was an important panel, and that's because if your company is working with a fully regulated utility and you're trying to explain the value proposition of your product to them, trying to sell a product to them, you have to understand that utility, if they choose to make that investment, they are going to have to go to their regulator, and they're going to have to explain why that was a good decision for their customers, why it was in the public interest of the state that they serve. And if they cannot make that case to their regulator, they may not be able to put that investment into rates, which ultimately means they're probably not going to make that investment, or they won't make the next round of investment. And so it's really important to be able to speak that same language with the company, and for the company to understand the burden they're going to have to meet later with the regulator. So I hope I've at least given a preview of why it's important to know what your economic regulator thinks of these issues. Like Kim, we have a very similar role. In my state, we call ourselves quasi-judicial, but also quasi-legislative. I would say that's because the process we use to arrive at our decisions, it looks sort of like a trial. When our utilities want to make a proposal to us to get recovery of an investment, we ask for testimony. We do cross-examination. It's a judicial process. But there's a pretty big zone of what we call zone of reasonableness and area for us to make a policy decision on what they're proposing and whether that's a good thing for our customers and our state. So Kansas is a little different than North Carolina and than a lot of states. There's a lot of states that have very strong public policy goals set forth in statute. Kansas is a very traditional utility state. We mostly abide by sort of the foundational rules that Kim set forth, which is, I think in statute it says the utility needs to provide sufficient and efficient service at just and reasonable rates, which is just another way of saying affordable and reliable service. And we don't have a lot of other specific statutory goals that our companies have to meet, which I frankly kind of like, because it gives me as the regulator the latitude in any individual case to look at the testimony, to understand the case the company is making, to hear them out on how they exercise their management discretion, and then to make a call of whether that fits within our goals of affordable and reliable service. And as you heard Evergy say, they try to aim for affordable, reliable, and sustainable. And where you weight those things as a regulator, you've got some discretion. Obviously, you give the company some management discretion to explain why it's the right decision for them and their company, but ultimately they need to convince the regulator that it's in the public interest of the state. So that's kind of the paradigm of where we come at it.
Yeah, I hope that's not lost on anyone here, right? There's a lot we want to do, and there's a lot of checks and balances, rightfully so, in this model, so that no one's just off kind of doing anything on their own, right? So.
And Jimmy, if I could follow up on something that was said with respect to that rate regulation, because we all have the same tools, and our main tools to regulate these public utilities so they do provide that safe, affordable, reliable electricity is through rate cases and through certificates of need. So, and for North Carolina, our statute, a utility can only obtain a certificate of need for generation plant, transmission facilities, and and it's called a CPCN proceeding. So that CPCN proceeding, I like to say, is a warm blanket around the utility, because when they receive that certificate, that them moving forward to build this generation plant or this transmission line, that they're going to be able, when they put it into service, to be able to recoup that from the ratepayers of North Carolina. And so the type of OpEx and use cases, the type of investment that we're talking about here today, those really don't fall in those two buckets. And so there is kind of more risk on the utility, because they can't really obtain, some commissions might allow for this pre-approval, but they cannot obtain this pre-approval process per se. And so there is some risk there. And we're both attorneys, so just keep in mind, unfortunately, my comments are not meant to be negative, but as an attorney, you look at worst case scenario, you just identify all of the problems so you can figure out the solutions.
Yeah, I'll just say same in Kansas. The type of investments we're talking about today are not the kind of things you can get pre-approval from. I mean, utilities regulatory divisions can go and talk to the regulator, try to educate them, tell them this is coming, but usually the first time it shows up is is in what you call the rate case. After the investment has already been made, that's the paradigm that a lot of utilities live under. And so if sometimes, if some of you out there are vendors and you're not understanding why it seems like your utility is being kind of conservative and wants to be absolutely certain this is something they can use, that's why. It's because they don't have assurance that they're going to get paid back for that investment until it's already been made. And so often utilities don't want to be the first mover. They want to be a follower, maybe a fast follower, but it's difficult to be the first one to make a move on new investments.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think kind of with what you all are saying, right? So with these investments, right, to no surprise, we're talking here at this conference around utility communications, advanced communications, involved with, or comprised of both wires and wireless, like private LTE. And we often, at least, some of us talk about it as a little bit of a platform investment, right? To which you can build use cases, to your example, about, on top of this investment. So with that, around advanced communications, it being a platform that can generate the ability to build on top of it, so like it can create more value the more you have it. With that, I'm just curious if there's any questions that you might have in your mind, either, or any like criteria that you might consider when you're asked to evaluate a utility's request for a large expenditure such as this. Andrew, could I go with you first?
I'll begin. I mean, first of all, I think it's pretty clear. Kim and I are not the subject matter experts here. We're the people that are going to look at these things after the fact. And I thought some of the discussions were really interesting to start to learn about this. But keep in mind, once it comes to us, all of the learning that had to take place within the utilities of how they could use these technologies, that's then going to have to be translated to the regulators to help them understand how it's a benefit to customers. But it's a good question on how these things will be judged. I mean, the first thing a regulator always wants to see are either a benefit cost analysis or an avoided cost analysis, or metrics. So the best thing you can do is to show that you've made an investment that will lower customer costs, that might somehow, it's maybe you've added capital cost, but maybe you are able to, because of that capital cost, reduce your O&M costs such that you can actually put downward pressure on rates. And if you can demonstrate that, that's super helpful. And so you're avoiding sort of your service fees to your public LTE, for example, by making that capital investment. But sometimes you make investments and there isn't a benefit cost. It's sometimes it's for reliability purposes. It doesn't save money, but it makes the service more reliable. Or from a cybersecurity standpoint, it's hard to quantify the risks that you have now avoided, or the intrusions you've now avoided. And so, for reliability, there are metrics, ways to pick up, how fast you caught things and how fast you restored service. From cybersecurity, I think maybe the best you can do is to give specific examples of things that have happened elsewhere or trends you see coming, and how those will be avoided with the new technologies. There are, so those are some of the metrics I think we'd have to see. There are risks to customers, and I think we would want to see those quantified as well, and understand that the company has taken that into account and explain how they balance that to make sure they think it's the right investment for customers.
Yeah, I would basically just reiterate everything that was said. We would look at reliability. Is it helping with your SAIDI and safety numbers? Are there cost reductions? The real question is that cost-benefit analysis. Are these investments going to benefit the customers? And are these benefits going to benefit the utility that flows down to benefiting the customers?
Any thoughts, you kind of touched on cybersecurity, any thoughts on kind of, we've seen this come up, at least just talking with ourselves among our peers here. It's, with cybersecurity, sometimes it's like, we often say, you don't wait to buy a lock for your door after you get robbed. right? So sometimes, these things, we understand them to be risks in the industry. Any thoughts on how you've seen that type of a conversation be proposed to you, whether it's cybersecurity or not, but just any insight there, because I know that tends to be a little bit of a chicken and egg thing.
Sure, and this is where I'm not being negative, but a thought when I was preparing for this panel, a thought crossed my mind with respect to cybersecurity, and I go back to when the FAST Act was passed and when utilities were getting rid of analog and moving everything to digital, is one of the use cases is like putting your SCADA systems and all your other systems on one private LTE network. And so my first thought from a cyber perspective was, is this going to make it more vulnerable? Because we also, as a utility commissioner, I value diversity. If you look at North Carolina's resource portfolio, meaning the generation portfolio, we have everything, and that's a good thing. We're not all in, like we do have a lot of nuclear, but we also have solar, battery storage, combined cycles, CTs. We're looking into, if you read the carbon plan, offshore wind, onshore wind. So that's something to think about, and what a regulator's going to be thinking about when, if one of the use cases is, we're going to put everything on this system, being able to respond to a question of, but will this make the system more vulnerable? If it goes down, everything goes down.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point about, the correlated, creating more correlated risks if you are using a singular system. I think the cyber issue or security issue is incredibly difficult because it is harder to quantify and monetize than some other things. I think it's got to just be a lot of dialogue between the regulator and the utility at that point. A lot of examples. So, we need to know with granularity, you can say, this is more secure than using a public LTE network. Well, how is it more secure? Give us the examples of exactly why it's more secure. Is that quantifiable in any way? Also, I want to know, have you thought about, as Kim said, are you introducing any new risks by going this route that didn't exist with the public LTE? Are you exposing yourselves to new things? Also, you have this issue of, okay, decentralizing sounds really good, but is it feasible for every utility to have the competency and resources to manage their own network? So, that's something that's going to have to be demonstrated as well. Is you have carriers that exist right now that have all this expertise. Tell us why you're going to be able to replace all that competency. And I know we're talking about working with vendors, many of which are in this room, and that's probably part of that conversation. But that's what folks are going to have to demonstrate to regulators is that you're going to be able to do this as well, and you're going to be able to, on balance, make things more secure. And I think it's going to be hard to quantify that, but you can get to a point with your regulator where they have comfort and agreement with where you are.
Yeah. There's certainly many ways to dice it up, right, and to present it. Any personal preferences or methods that you've seen resonate more with others? You think about workshops, calling you up, having a conversation, providing a painful amount of analysis, right, that everyone totally reads, right? So any thoughts on your all's end, that either your own personal experience or from others that you've seen?
I'll go first because I'll just be real quick. I like workshops. I think especially if a service provider if a utility is wanting to embark on something like this, I think it's really good to start signaling that early to their regulator to try to explain why they're doing something new, why they're taking a different direction. Not great to end up in a rate case after an investment has been made, a really important investment, and try to explain after the fact why you did it. Give your regulator more time to be part of that process. I mean, it's a delicate balance because regulators are sensitive that we don't want to invade management discretion at the utilities. But sometimes when it's a really important shift in direction, if I was management, I would want to bring the regulator in and let them feel like not necessarily they were part of that decision, but they were brought along to feel comfortable with it as it was going along, and you had an opportunity for dialogue before you just get that decision at the very end.
And I wholeheartedly agree. We call them technical conferences in North Carolina, and for example, this will be new to a lot of the commissioners, and I just liken it to when energy storage was becoming more prevalent. North Carolina, that was one of the first things that I did in 2019. Once I became a commissioner, I was a staffer before I became a commissioner, and I kept trying to press the commissioners. We need to learn more about this. We need to understand all of the use cases of storage, right? It's kind of like private LTE. There are lots of different use cases, and let's understand all of those different use cases. And so we had a series of technical workshops, and I just really think that that was very, very valuable. And now we're putting more storage on the system in North Carolina. Our Duke Energy is.
Yeah. Yeah, we hear often about, workshops just like that, right? Just, plainly speaking, right, the takeaway is, well, just have open and honest communication and bring others along, right? It goes along with like every project we work on. But, especially in these workshops, at least the ones that I'm been familiar with, you also have just stakeholders, customers, right? Just the electric customers. And so, you often hear a lot about like, trying to explain this topic, which I know that you guys both told me that you're experts in now because you've been here on private LTE. But, for folks who couldn't join UBBA, like all of our customers, they often just rightfully so ask, like, why do I care about this? What's in it for me, right? And so, like, you kind of both touched on a little bit of your responsibilities, right? Part of your basic job function is providing that balance. Are there any thoughts on like helping the audience here, just kind of maybe understanding the customer's point of view, right? I'm trying to kind of position you all as that conduit between us and the customers, especially when it comes to affordability.
Sure. So it's different among commissions, but whenever we have a rate case where the utility's coming in and asking for an increase in rates, the commissioners themselves travel the state of North Carolina and go to what is called public witness hearings. And, the electric industry is in a build cycle right now. And customers are really coming and speaking out. So we are the face to the customers, and I've heard through those travels heartbreaking stories, right? And I'll share just one example of a woman. She came in and testified, and she said, I was just walking around the Publix, Food Line, Harris Teeter, and I think it was $20 to feed her and her husband for the next 2 weeks. So I went home and told my son about that testimony. And of course, my son's like, oh my goodness, I can, spend that for dinner, for lunch. And so hearing these stories, we really do take seriously our job about affordability, and every dollar spent needs to provide a benefit.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I don't know, because we are in a build cycle, I feel like we just finished a build cycle 5 or 10 years ago, but we're in another build cycle. The pressure of affordability is pretty crushing, and it's something we hear about all the time. And it is very difficult as regulators to be ready to sign off on rate increases, and it doesn't mean we won't. But it means that we need to show that we really scrutinize things. So I talked about earlier, we need to understand what the value proposition is. Wonderful if you can show avoided future costs, avoided or deferred investment in other areas that might be unlocked here. It is good if you can even demonstrate, concrete areas within cyber or reliability where you can show improved service. But, we're going to look at other things too. We're going to look at the, one thing I can just tell you, when things like this come in, I mean, our staff, I know, is going to immediately identify the area of transfer of risk. So right now, your utility company probably just pays a third-party provider, a public LTE provider. They get a service, and it's on that provider to keep that service up to date and to provide all of those services. And maybe it's a little more expensive, but they know that the utility knows they can just pay that amount and move on. Well, as soon as they become the provider, the risk is then on the utility, AKA its customers, who have now bought this, who have made this capital investment to the extent that it's included in rates. And say technology moves faster than we thought it would. Well, those investments may be depreciated quicker than you had hoped, and you need to then reinvest. And I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's a risk that you take on as now the person that's invested in that capital, and you are running those services. So those are the kinds of questions that regulators are going to ask, and they're going to be real sticklers to get good answers, and at least make sure that the regulated entity has fully thought through that scenario, has done planning, has projections on what they actually expect in a long-term sense. So there will be a lot of tough questions from regulators on those items.
Yeah, rightfully so, right? And a lot of what times when we propose investments, it's not, hey, here's the next 40 years, right? It's here's the next 2 to 5, whatever that looks like, right? And so, but we talk a lot about these platforms, these investments being 20 plus years of life and 20 plus years of providing value. Any nuance to what you're saying? Like when you think about, well, here's what I've got with the spend and the benefits within that spend period, and then also, hey, those benefits we expect to perpetuate beyond that time frame.
Sure. So, we're a least cost state, which means the investment needs to be least cost. But least cost doesn't mean the lowest cost. And so I'm speaking in terms that I understand. I'll use transmission as an example. As you know, we're having a very difficult time in this country to build transmission, to build pipelines, transmission, just generally infrastructure. And so with transmission, the solution that some utilities have come up with is, okay, well, we're going to change the core of the line, right? And so it may be a carbon core, I believe, maybe 3 times more expensive than the historic line that they've been putting up there. But when you're doing that cost-benefit analysis, it doesn't mean least cost. It means, yes, you're looking over the time horizon. You're looking at what benefits that it is going to provide. And so all of those factors, it is more nuanced. All of those factors do come into play.
Yeah, Jimmy, I don't know if this is really what you're thinking of, but when you both mentioned time horizons, it got me thinking about the discussion I want to have with my utilities about why they're pursuing these type of investments that would be considered grid modernization, enable grid edge devices, enable distributed energy resources, enabling new EV capabilities, enabling demand response opportunities. We have a lot of utilities right now that are embarking on what they call grid modernization.
Sure.
But that looks really different for different utilities. I mean, some of them truly are modernizing. They're putting in a lot of these advanced devices. They are reconfiguring their grid. Others are doing grid modernization, but it really just looks like a rebuild of the grid that existed, 80 years ago. And let's remember, your grid lasts a long time, and sometimes investments last a long time. And so the conversation I want to have is, the things you're investing in today, how do they meet those needs, the needs that you see, probably not 80 years from now, because I don't think anybody's going to be able to predict these days, how fast things move. Nobody can predict what that looks like. But you can see some of these technologies, like what I just mentioned, coming in, 5, 10 years. Within 20 years, I expect, demand response to be really dynamic. There's going to be a lot of electric vehicles, and you might need telemetry data coming from smart meters. How are these going to play and enable some of those capabilities 10, 15, 20 years from now? So that's a conversation I really want to have. Are you taking a long-term scenario look when you are looking at these investments? What do you expect the most likely scenarios to be? And how do these help you achieve that?
So not just the cost, right, but then also, how would you say, how it ties in with the other investments that are not just network communications. Is that kind of where you were?
Sure, yeah. And another thing is what commissioners will consider is that kind of lifespan, the time span of the asset, because I know the utilities have put in AMI meters, and I know some of the discussion or the questions involved with the rollout of AMI is how long will it last? How long will they be supportive? How quickly will they become obsolete and have to be replaced? Because that kind of goes into that cost-benefit analysis. If it becomes obsolete, it goes to the issues that Andrew was talking about. That is a cost consideration, and those questions will be asked by any commission. How long is this going to be supportive? Do we see it's the lifespan, the true lifespan, or will it be shorter? And then how much will that capital investment be X number of years down the road?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned obsolescence. That's a real issue in our industry, especially when you're talking about some of these investments that aren't, they're not wires that are going to last 60 to 80 years. These are devices that are going to last a much shorter time span. And if, as a regulator, you're told initially it's a 20-year investment, then it turns out technology changes really fast, right. And it ends up being an 8-year investment, and they're obsolete and need to be replaced. Then you have the dreaded scenario that no utility wants to talk about, which is a stranded asset, or the potential of a stranded asset, which is something that is no longer needed and, in our parlance, used and useful, or used and required to be used in public service. And then it's kind of a jump ball of, does that continue to be recovered from customers because you made an investment that's now obsolete? Could you have foreseen that? It sets up a conversation that's not fun for a utility or regulators. And so it's something that I hope people are thinking about on the front end of how do we make investments with the least possible risk of becoming obsolete or becoming not useful in a shorter time frame than we thought, or are we mitigating that in some ways by having that technology be more plug and play? It can evolve with changing circumstances. I wish I understood the technology better to have those conversations, but I know it's coming.
Well, if you come up with it, you're probably going to retire because you're going to sell that to all of us here. But I know we're going to run up against the end of our time here, and I just want to remind anyone, if you have any questions, please feel free. We can kind of come up here. But as folks are getting lined up, just one quick thought. One quick thought or one last thought you'd want to share with the group here before we kind of jump to some questions?
I think getting to know the regulators, right, and to perform these technical conferences. I would also say read a rate case order. Try to find a short one, but read a rate case order on grid modernization or grid improvement plan. I know that Duke came in with a grid improvement plan that the commission said was not targeted enough. So you really want to make sure that your utilities are making a targeted ask. And so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate a couple things I said earlier, because I think they're going to be the key points when utilities have to come to their regulators, and that is, this area of investment is something new for utility companies. It's not just building a generation facility finding a supply chain for the fuel to burn, and then constructing a series of ever smaller wires to get to the customers. It's something new. And so you really are going to have to explain to regulators why it is right for the utility to be the one making this investment. Why is this investment part of, or an integral part of, core utility service in the future? I think that's a conversation that's not, it's not insurmountable, but it's going to be something that it's going to have to be a conversation you have with regulators. And as Kim was saying, like, do it early. We love workshops, technical conferences. Whenever it's something novel, introduce us to it early, not after the fact.
And I'll just quick plug. I mean, we're literally sitting at UBBA, where I would encourage each of you to think about maybe just asking your regulatory departments, invite your commissioners or their staff, come check it out, come learn everything about what we have going on. With that, can I please go to the shadows in the side of the room? I apologize.
Hi there. So this is Leanna Alt with Nokia, but I have a whole list of questions. We could probably go another hour, but I'll keep it to one. And so, Andrew, you mentioned transfer of risk when power utilities are switching from carrier services to maybe a CapEx-driven model where they own and operate their own services. I came from a power utility before working for Nokia, and my understanding, at least in some states, that the onerous of reporting outages, even communication outages, still falls on the power utilities. So many of them feel that by privatizing that, yes, it's an additional CapEx spend that could result in rate increases, but now they have ownership and control over those services. Do you have an opinion about that as a transfer of risk from a third party back to really where I personally feel that it should be, which is on the utility?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and that should be part of the conversation. I think that falls under the area of reliability, resilience. Can you communicate why service is better? Because you're right. Ultimately, it doesn't matter whether it was the utility service or whether it was a service they contracted for. They are going to be the ones responsible for restoring service, reporting outages. It's going to be on them. Yeah, my point was more the financial risk, the element that you're going to make a capital expenditure. The company will get a rate of return on that now, but they will also be at risk for keeping that investment up to date. So it's a different kind of risk, but it's a good point that it is maybe more clear when they own it that is their obligation. They can't just point at a third party to say, well, it was their issue. That they need to explain it themselves when they were providing that service. So good point.
And I do think that's a very strong use case, which we heard here, was having control. And I can give an example with Hurricane Helene. Duke doesn't have private LTG, but they have a private voice network. And so they were able, there was minimal damage. They were able to get the restoration workers out because that network was, again, not really injured, and then it was up and running before the commercial networks were up and running. And so they had control over that, and that is a win-win-win, right? That's a great story to show the use of these networks that benefit our customers because the restoration began earlier because they had control over the system.
Thank you. Can I ask the next person? I apologize, the light's like...
No problem. This is Jenny Bratton with Ericsson, and I want to thank you for being here. Truly, I think this is new and different approach to UBBA. This is 4 years running, and this is the first time that I believe we've had regulators here, and I absolutely love it. It's giving a lot of insight to all of the teams that are involved. My question, though, is I love the idea of technology conferences, and you are at one right now. And Commissioner Duffley, I know that you said that you walked around a little bit beforehand. The question is kind of two-part. Will you have the chance to walk around a little bit more? And in the time that you've been here and spoken to the vendor community as well as the other utilities that are here, do you have any ahas that you're taking away with you in conversations or walking around the showcase at the things that you've seen? Is there any insights that you can provide that maybe you've learned that you didn't know?
Well, absolutely. No, I'm actually going to be running to make my plane, so I will not have any more time after this session ends. But my takeaway is you guys need to come to North Carolina. We need to hold a technical conference so I can learn more. I mean, I really did, just in a short period of time last night, I learned so much and learned the pros and the benefits of these systems, and that's my takeaway. I'll leave it there.
Awesome, thanks. I know we are out of time. We're going to start getting the Oscar music here in a second. So really want to just thank you both for being here. If I could ask you all to please join me in thanking them. Really, really insightful. Thank you so much.